In this video, I'll be covering 6 in-person drafting tips so your next event can be a success. Tip number 1, call the store ahead of time. Most in-person drafts are held at local game stores, and because every game store is different, it's worth calling in advance to make sure you know the lay of the land. Some stores you have to register for the draft online, sometimes you just show up in person and then sign up as you go, so it's worth showing up a little early. Some stores you register online and then pay in person. It's different every time, and every store is a little bit different. And by talking to them in advance, you'll save yourself a lot of hassle and prevent the absolute worst outcome of showing up to the local event on Friday night, all ready to go, and then finding out that you can't play because the store has a limited number of seats and they're all sold out. So make sure that you can just call the store. They're always friendly. They're happy to give you the information because they want you to come to their store. They want you to come play. And so just by calling them in advance, you save yourself from the nightmare scenario, and you make sure that you feel a little bit more comfortable and confident going into your event. Tip number 2, prepare for a 4-hour event. That's usually the amount of time these things take. The draft portion takes around an hour for drafting and deck building. The rounds are usually 50-minute match timers, and then rounds will go to time, and then there's a little bit of like time between rounds to like get the pairings up and things like that. And so each round takes an hour, and then the draft takes an hour, and so that's 4 hours total. And so make sure that you bring some water if you're going to need that. Bring a snack, though preferably one that's not going to leave your fingers dusty. So maybe leave like Doritos or things like that at home, but like things like string cheese or whatever like that aren't going to be a mess. And then also, like, if you need to make sure that you let your dog out before you go, or that you give him a walk, or like make sure that you take care of these things in advance so you're not going to be stressed about things. It's going to take around 4 hours. It's a lot of fun, but it does take a good amount of time to draft in person. Now, another thing about drafting in person brings me to tip number 3, which is talk to other players, because that is one of the main benefits of going to draft in person. And this isn't purely from a social perspective, though, of course, that is a ton of fun just talking with other Magic players. But also, if you're trying to get better as a player, talking with other players is really, really helpful. And that is one of the things that's not available online that is really, really cool in person. In person, you can be like, okay, that game seemed really close. I'll ask my opponent what they think I could have done differently to maybe emerge victorious. And maybe they'll say, oh, I think you maybe shouldn't have used your removal spell on this guy. I was never going to be able to attack with him. Or maybe they'll say, I think this card's a little bit weak. Maybe you could play this other card instead. I think this card's a little bit better. Or you can just ask them for general tips like, hey, do you mind taking a look at my deck? You seem like you know what you're doing. And even if they say things that maybe you don't agree with, or they have a card evaluation that's different than yours, you can still learn a lot by talking to other players, and it can make you a much better player and also be a lot of fun in the process. Tip number 4, keep the game state clear. Now, if you're playing online, the game keeps track of this for you, but in person, you're in charge of keeping track of life totals. You're in charge of making sure that creatures with +1/+1 counters on them have like dice on them or things like that to make it clear. You're in charge of keeping track of tokens, making sure that if somebody played a land drop or not, they don't accidentally play 2 lands in a turn or any of those things. So making sure that the game state is clear is very, very important, and making sure you're a little bit methodical about it. Make sure you check everything, don't miss any triggers, all of that stuff that the game keeps track of online for you. It's a bit of an adjustment if you are not used to playing in person, but it is definitely something that's very, very important. And if you are keeping track of life totals, make sure that you don't just trust your opponent to do it, because people can forget things in the heat of the moment. Magic is very complicated, and you don't want to have a situation where their life total is way higher than you think it should be. And if you could just keep track of it yourself, you could be like, oh yeah, I hit you for 2 this one turn. It looks like you forgot to mark that down when you were like keeping track of life totals. So things like that. So make sure that both players are maybe keeping track of life totals, or that if you're letting your opponent do it, that you're very paying attention to the whole process, because your opponent isn't going to necessarily be trying to like keep their life total higher or mark your life total lower or any of these other things or forget life gain, but it's a very complicated thing. So don't just offload all of that burden to your opponent. Make sure that you're both doing your best, and make sure that if you are going to be using a token or something like that, you don't just put like a paperclip on the battlefield, because that's going to be confusing, and maybe people forget that the paperclip is a token, or that it's a 1/1 bird or something like that. So just make sure everything's as clear as possible, that you can be you don't necessarily have to have the exact token, but you can be like, okay, you use a face down magic card example and be like, okay, this is a 2/2 token or whatever it is. So those are some useful things to do for keeping the game state clear. Tip number 5, be aware of the clock. You want to make sure that you finish your round in time, because having a draw isn't really a lot of fun. And so you want to make sure that you play at a reasonable pace, that your opponent plays at a reasonable pace, but also that you aren't being a jerk about it. And also, you are oftentimes going to finish rounds early, so you can sometimes even afford to play slower and make sure you're thinking about your decisions, because sometimes it's nice to just be like, okay, I did absolutely everything I could that match. I didn't just rush through my plays and things like that. So take your time, but also be aware of the clock. Every so often glance up, be like, okay, we're still in game one and we've already halfway through the round timer. And then you can like calmly say to your opponent, let's make sure we finish the round, because obviously neither of us wants this to end in a draw, because that's just like not a very fun scenario for either person. And so making sure that you both play at a reasonable pace. Every time I've said that, my opponents have been understanding. And if there is an issue, you can always talk to the game person running the event. You can be like, okay, me and my opponent want to make sure we finish our game. Could you watch us for a second to make sure we're both playing at a reasonable pace? And when you group yourself with your opponent, you're not being confrontational about it. You're just trying to make sure you both finish the game and play at a reasonable pace. And that is going to make things a lot easier. Now, tip number 6 is going to be a tip for playing in person that is not an issue online at all. And this is don't reveal information by mistake. Now, online, you draw your cards, you play them, your opponent doesn't have access to what you're drawing. But in person, your opponent sees you physically draw your card. If you draw your card and then you immediately be like, okay, perfect, and then you play your land from that card you drew, you've given your opponent information that you didn't need to give them. So what you can do is you draw your card, put it in your hand, put your hand down, look at the board state, or you just like shuffle your hand a little bit. You don't have to make a loud noise when you do it. You can just like do this a little bit when you're looking at the board state or whatever, and then your opponent doesn't know what you drew, which is an important piece of information. And I'll give you one example just as one of the many cases where it's important to know. Let's say that your opponent has a card that they know you would have killed if you had a removal spell, and you draw your card and then immediately play it and reveal that it was a land. Your opponent now knows you don't have a removal spell with high confidence, and so they're going to be much more able to go for combat tricks, even if you have mana up, or they're going to be able to put an aura on their creature, even if you have mana up, and not be afraid of getting blown out or things like that, because they knew that you drew a land for the turn. Whereas if you drew your card, did a little bit of like 2-card shuffle, or even just put your hand down and then picked up your hand again, those things would make it so your opponent didn't really know what you drew, and so they maybe have to be a little bit more worried about a combat trick or things like that. So that's just something to be aware of. Don't reveal information by mistake, because in person is a little bit different than online, where online you draw your land, you just play it immediately. Your opponent doesn't really know what you drew because it's kind of automatically hidden information. In person, you have to be a little bit more careful about these things and make sure that you aren't just obvious about necessarily the exact card that you drew for your turn. Anyway, that's going to do it for these tips. Obviously, gameplay tips for new drafters are going to be very similar online and in person. So this video wasn't really about the necessarily strategy of new drafting, though I do have videos on that if you're interested. And if you want to prepare for a draft format by watching draft guide type content, I make draft guides for each set, so you can watch those as well to get familiar with the cards. Because another thing about in-person drafting, especially, or any new drafting, is you're going to be doing a lot of reading if you don't know what the cards do in advance. So having a little bit of prep can be very helpful. But this is specifically about in-person drafting, and these tips, let's just go through them before. Again, one more time. 1, call the store ahead of time. 2, prepare for a 4-hour event. 3, talk with other players. 4, keep the game state clear. 5, be aware of the clock. And 6, don't reveal information by mistake. If you made it to the end of this video, leave #paperplayer in the comment section down below. That's going to do it for this one, though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.